think we all know it, but I may as well just say it. Highguard is a game living on borrowed time. And that's time that it earned because the leadership team fired most of the development team that built the damn game. And now the fear is that the game is in a death spiral, the type of which it won't be able to recover from. Because whenever people see layoffs like this, they don't really feel like investing their time, their energy, and their money into a game that just may not be there. It only took 16 days after launch for the layoffs to happen, and since that happened, well, things have only got worse, at least for their PR, and now there's even a new Tencent-shaped question hanging over everything in this story. So we have a lot to talk about. 16 days after launch, Highguard developer Wildlight Entertainment began laying off staff. People posted on LinkedIn saying that, quote, most of the team was gone. Wildlight then confirmed it, stating that they decided to, quote, part ways with a number of our team members while keeping a core group of developers to continue innovating on and supporting the game. One of the people let go, a level designer called Alex Grainer, was a bit more blunt. He said, this one really stings. There was a lot of unreleased content that I and others had designed for Highguard. So what we see in that is there is lots of content that exists on the servers that team has, and the skeleton crew that remains can probably ship that content. But obviously, there's concerns for the future. Concerns that only got bigger when the game's website went down. For many people, especially seeing even the site go down, it was a clear trend that Highguard was firmly on the way out and would be dead. Though it turns out it's not dead, at least in that way, because one of the remaining devs explained to their Discord that the website was being, quote, transferred and simplified, but that was low priority, and the reputational damage of their site going down was already done. A little bit rough, I mean, talk about someone being kicked whenever they're down. So, the remaining staff then are simply going to be working on improving the game, shipping whatever content that they can, and that's actually why they just shipped another base, another gadget, and a little bit more importantly for the old bottom line, some new cosmetics and bundles. Though with everything going on, I don't really know if players will feel able to invest to buy those cosmetics and bundles, even if they like the game. And the only way that'll change is leadership from this team just coming out and saying, listen, this is the situation, this is how long we can run for, all of those things, so that people don't feel like there's a massive air of uncertainty over even supporting the game, which is a bad place to be if you're someone who likes that game and wants to support it. You just won't feel like you can. And obviously, there are loads of opinions flying around, from commenters to devs to publishers, just people trying to talk about this game and work out why it did not work. Was it too niche? Was it the art style? Was it the Game Awards? Is it all just Jeff Keighley's master plan for chaos? Who knows? And the thing is, you look at some of the peaks, like launch day, and you wonder how a game could perform, air quotes, so well, and then need to lay off the majority of staff within a month. Maybe that's because launch day isn't everything. So Highguard had nearly 100,000 concurrents on Steam at launch, but we now know the success likely went further because according to Ampere data, and reported by the Game Business, 1.54 million people played the game across all platforms in the 2 days of January, putting it on par with existing games like Palworld, DayZ, and Red Dead Redemption 2. And across the whole month, Circana ranked it in the top 10 for US Steam that week and the top 20 for console. For any new launch, especially in indie, that's incredible. And you may think, 100,000 concurrents, 1.54 million players, this doesn't compute. Well, remember what concurrency is. It's just concurrency. If you play the game for an hour or two in launch evening, then you're going to be one of that 1.54 million, even if you're not one of the current, concurrents, right? So a lot of people. But then it hit 15,000 concurrents on Steam by week 2. And for many, that was a clear sign of failure. People bouncing off because of server issues, bugs, or the gameplay just not landing. But here's the thing. That first week isn't really the moment to look at, even though that first week had some little glimmers. You saw that if people played for more than 2 hours, the reviews were way more positive, which is to be expected, but I think what is interesting is the sheer quantity of those positive reviews. Yes, the Steam score was really bad, but the number of reviews in total was humongous, so even though positive was not as large a percentage as I'm sure the devs would have wanted, it was still quite a lot of people. But even with all that, it's Episode 2's launch on the 6th of February. That's the thing we need to talk about. It had maps, mounts, quality of life, a new hero that had some kind of neat movement, turns into a wolf, does wolfy things, but it peaked at 8,500 concurrents. That's a weaker show, but it's not an unhealthy player count for an indie multiplayer game. Because when you're an indie, the revenue that you get, minus any platform fees, is yours. It doesn't go to a publisher, so you are operating fundamentally at a, well, higher degree of financial efficiency. So they don't need as many people to sustain themselves. And that's actually why concurrent player count is not the real story here. No, it isn't. Because regardless of numbers at launch, Wildlight leadership will have had targets for daily average players and spending that they would have expected to retain. Player count dropping is very much expected. But the problem is the trend line, yes in terms of player count, but perhaps far more so in the one thing that we don't have data for, and that is the literal amount of money. Although I think we can say that the lack of incoming funds absolutely was their big problem. Now let me explain. The first season pass was actually free. There were minimal cosmetics to purchase, so the game launched in a fairly unmonetized state. That's fine and expected. Make your launch as big as possible and give people not really a lot to scrutinize. The second season pass was not free, it was paid. It went live on February 6th, and 6 days after it went live, the layoffs started. You see, Episode 2 and the paid Battle Pass were Wildlight's first real chance to make money. Player counts are only half the story. You can't pay your devs with a player count. You need money. Now, maybe leadership's goals were absurd, expecting players to show up at the rates of a AAA shooter. Maybe, though, they would have been happy with the Season 2 numbers in terms of players. But in a free-to-play game, player counts are only as good as the percentage of those people that actually convert into being payers. In less scrupulous games, that's why they hook you in with dark monetization patterns right off the bat. And it's why those dark monetization patterns tend to be related to player power or significant in-game friction. We see that all over the mobile game space. And even with that, it is often said that it's over 30 days, 35 days to convert someone from a player to a payer. And that is in a mobile game using all of the dark patterns. Obviously, for a game like this that isn't using those dark patterns, it's probably going to take longer. And that's why slashing your team to pieces only 6 days after most people have an opportunity to even spend money in your game shows that something's went really wrong. Now, obviously, that first free Battle Pass was an attempt to earn the good graces of gamers by delaying monetization, but it could have also meant that people had no buy-in to stay with the game. And we certainly know that conversion of players to payers just didn't really happen at a meaningful scale, and it seems that they ran out of runway. Now, runway is how much money a business has before it stops operating. Run out of runway and, the plane crashes. And here's where it's interesting. As highlighted by GameFile, Highguard, like most games released right now, was funded in the post-pandemic boom. You see, back then, money was cheap, interest rates were pretty much zero, and that meant that it was fairly easy for anyone with a whole bunch of access to capital to just take a punt on a bunch of developers. Now, Tencent was one of the groups doing this, and you'll have seen many other megacorps as well, like, say, NetEase. Now, Tencent led the funding rounds for Wildlight when money was cheap and easy to offer, and it's reported that they led the funding rounds for Wildlight through their Timi division, a TIMI. You may have seen the logo before. But what's important here is they don't actually own the studio, right? So this is still an independent studio in terms of its ownership structure, although, yes, some equity probably will have been given up. It's probably a situation like that. So Tencent then were seemingly one of the largest financial backers, but they don't have majority ownership of the company. That means they're not in control of the company. So at best, they're a minority shareholder like they are with many other studios, like, say, Larian. Now, maybe Tencent's investment came with an option to convert into ownership if the company succeeded, but obviously it didn't. But that stuff was going on in 2022, back when the team was 28 people and, quote, fully funded. 2026 is a different story. Now, Tencent funded the team until launch. That seems like a pretty simple sentence, doesn't it? But there's actually a lot inside it. Because are they funding it to the intended launch of the game when it's in a perfect state and ready to go? Or is it that the development team received a certain amount of money and they've now just had to ship the game whenever the money has ran out? That's the thing. Projects can be uncertain, things can be delayed, and quite often, if a game is failing at launch, it's often because it wasn't supposed to launch that way. It's rather that the budget ran out, and they basically had to ship whatever the hell they had. Highguard shipped. The alternative was probably going bust and having absolutely nothing to show for it. And that's the rough position that so many companies end up in. But of course, with the game being out, it would need to hit a certain revenue per month to actually pay the devs who are building it. They need to be bringing enough money in to actually start projecting their revenue, work out their cash flow, all the things that you need to do to support an ongoing live service. And those things obviously did not look good. That meant the leadership were faced with a choice. They could keep everyone on and work for as long as money lasts. Maybe that could have been weeks. Who knows? Maybe they could have hoped to turn it around. The other option is to radically downsize the team, because in doing that, whatever money they've got and whatever money they bring in will go far, far longer. And obviously, they chose the latter. But that does have consequences. The studio may exist for longer, but a game performing layoffs this close to launch, yes, it hurts the devs who have got to keep delivering the game, but it also shakes the confidence of players who don't want to invest into something that's basically obviously unstable. Now, evidently, there's some interest and projected revenue, enough to try and keep things going. It could be that they're not getting a lot of money, but maybe they think it's enough to keep on whatever team they've got. We just don't know yet because we don't have the hard numbers. But here's the thing. This is just one story, one example. It's an example of something that is going on absolutely everywhere in this industry. And a big reason is that the games market is completely different now to how it was whenever Highguard started development. The development of this game started in 2022. By launch, they had grown to about 100 developers. Now, even in an era where smaller teams are being pitched as the solution to everything, well, that's not a lot of people for a live service game. Because to keep up pace with a live service game, you just do need a shitload of people. If you've ever wondered why live service games seem really slow to change in big, meaningful ways, it's essentially that reason. But unlike the AAA live services they'd be competing against, well, there's no publisher for Highguard. There's no other revenue stream to pick up the slack, and in 2026, clearly no funding partner to step in and take a punt on them. The new normal is fairly simple then. If a bet made in the post-pandemic era fails, the studio just dies. I mean, Highguard failing to sell passes and microtransactions already does basically mean that they're stuck, that they can't really make more money. All they can do is save money by cutting away their team and hoping they can make the line go up later. Now, you may be thinking, surely this wouldn't be a problem if the launch of your game correlated with you getting money, such as by charging for the game. You could look at Arc Raiders. That's a game that did that, launched as a paid product. That would have helped with the upfront money. It would have helped with buy-in because, funnily enough, people who have bought a game are people who are willing to hand over money. They'll actually convert better into ongoing payers. Well, as good as that may sound, they didn't have a big brand. They didn't have other revenue streams. They didn't have the big publisher backing that, say, Arc Raiders had with Nexon. And clearly, in terms of launch quality, they did not have what they would need to justify a price tag. So even if a price tag could have helped their immediate financial position, it wouldn't have worked. I think a big thing is, yes, if you put a price tag in your game and it launches with immediate, amazing product market fit, boom, you're minted. Helldivers, Arc Raiders. But if you launch with a price tag and you haven't achieved product market fit, you're just going to be immediately executed. Take a look at Concord. It's a perfect example of that. Now, we see other games like, say, Spectre Divide that have tried to come into this shooter space as a free-to-play and have not worked. We fundamentally haven't seen big sustained successes here, and in the previous video we did in Highguard, we talked about a bunch of other shooters, some of which are really, really good, that had came out and that people were completely unaware of. Now, when we take a look at the games that are more successful, like Marvel Rivals or Arena Breakout Infinite, slick title there, chaps, well, those are succeeding off the backs of humongous investments at a scale designed to peel players away from whatever their game of choice is. Now, there are niche titles like Supervive or Mecha Break that have got great reviews, but even their player counts are dwindling. And like everything else about Highguard, there is no one solution to suggest here, though I do have a few. And as leadership cuts this team down, the real takeaway is that even compared to a decade ago, second chances do not exist. And it's all contributed to something I see in the comments, something that I feel myself. Where the fuck's all this money going? Like, what is actually the deal? Why does the games industry look like this these days? And you know what? I think I have a few answers. And I have to say thanks to Highguard because it helped me get to them. Okay, I've got a fundamental belief about games in this space. I think they are played a bit more like sports. So a League of Legends player could be playing League for like 10 years. And it doesn't matter to them that there isn't a humongous, fundamentally crazy new amount of content or a new amazing campaign to get immersed in, because they're playing League like it's a sport. The same thing goes for Counter-Strike. Same thing went for Overwatch in some ways. It goes for other games like your Rainbow Six Sieges. Basically, those competitive kind of default multiplayer team shooter games. What I think has happened is our industry has looked at those games being successful, and it's tried to fight for those players, right? So say Ubisoft trying to fight Call of Duty, trying to fight them for their own players. Now, I understand doing that. And if you're a big AAA, you have all the money in the earth, maybe you can actually pull that off. But for everyone else, it does seem a bit silly. It's like, a whole bunch of people play this ball game called football, which I know can mean several things depending on where you are in the world, but whatever. It's like seeing that and thinking, this is great market validation that people enjoy ball-based, team-based sports. Okay, we're going to design and launch one with a humongous team, and we're going to peel away fans of football to our new game. If I put it like that, it would seem absolutely preposterous, because these are games, but they're games that people play more like they're a sport, like they're that kind of default thing. So I think the games industry has spent inordinate amounts of money basically just trying to do that, trying to dethrone incumbents. But when I look at the games industry over the scale of decades, I think what you see is that that's the wrong thing to do. You don't try to kill the current incumbent by tweaking a few things and launching something of the same genre. You don't dethrone Coca-Cola by having a slightly different formulation of Coca-Cola. No, you get some sort of new drink, cool thing that the market hasn't seen, that pulls people away from Coke because your offering is new, genuinely different. I think that is why so many of these games have failed. Spectre Divide, Counter-Strike, but a bit different. Valorant, Counter-Strike, but a bit different. But with Riot money, Riot backing. The scale factors that an indie team like this one just obviously could not pull off. But even with that said, there is a new, modern thing to think about, and that is how immediate success is almost needed. You see, years ago, Fortnite and Rainbow Six Siege genuinely struggled with their launches, but they found their feet and they became industry giants. Basically, they had the funding they needed to grow through the rocky periods and to find product market fit whenever their game was there as a live thing. It literally took time. But in this case, that's obviously not possible. And we can think why it isn't possible. And there's a very obvious reason. They literally couldn't afford to do it. So we then need to ask ourselves, how could they have afforded to do it? And here's my contention. A bunch of developers with AAA skills, AAA, norms, because that is just where they worked, tried to dethrone AAA. Okay? Now they did that by making a game that looks and feels AAA. Like the fidelity of the models, even some of the art style things. Yeah, it's trying to take on AAA by looking and feeling like a AAA. But the problem is, that's really goddamn hard and expensive to do. All of those models, all of those skins, that takes a lot of money and a lot of time. And the higher your fidelity is, generally speaking, the harder it is to iterate and iterate and iterate. Which maybe means that the Highguard that we got is just a bit of a plan that they felt locked into. Now, in another world, where they chose an art style that wasn't as high fidelity, one where they didn't decide to be independently AAA, but rather decided to be an independent that can become AAA, maybe if they more fully embraced what being an independent studio means, especially financially, then they could have pulled it off. But equally, maybe it wasn't possible because of their funding. A lot of venture capital money was going into games in this period of time. Those types of VC bets are not designed for sustainable growth. They are designed for real big fucking humongous fast growth whenever the damn thing launches. And that would mean that they would probably only be able to get funding by saying, we're going to make a AAA looking game that can compete with AAAs, just that instead of all of the money going to our old friends at Electronic Arts, they'll be going to us and to you, Mr. Venture Backer. And by the way, as people who have ran big AAA live service games, here's how the finances of them work. Look at this, isn't it fantastic? Perhaps you can see how the funding model of games fundamentally defines what those games can be. And that perhaps is one of the reasons why this whole post-pandemic boom type of just wave of games has felt the way that it has. And now what'll happen is those laid off devs will either decide to go back into AAA, where it'll be extremely hard to get a job, and where they'll be getting a job, at the big behemoth that they wanted to leave, right? Not wanting to be under the yoke of one of those megacorps. And yes, it is the case that Wildlight was never some tiny little self-funded indie, absolutely. But even though they'll have got funding from a bunch of those external partners, the company still is responsible for itself, right? It still is certainly a lot more independent than if you were working in a studio that was wholly owned by a big AAA publisher. So they'll either have to go back to that, or just, go to a different industry, which probably won't be good. Those people are certainly capable of fantastic things, just in another environment. Look at, say, Expedition 33. For all the grief that people give Ubisoft, well, Expedition 33 is a bunch of Ubisoft people, and a bunch of people for whom it was their first job in the industry. And I think that shows that whenever the kind of working conditions, the scope, the budget, and all those things are well aligned for a game, people really can cook and do their best work. In this situation, they just weren't able to cook for long enough because of the type of game they were trying to make. You know, let's just take on EA and all the live service things. Pretty hard, right? But you know what's also hard? Having general broad spectrum trust in the world, and in things such as Discord. There's a reason why a lot of people aren't trusting Discord right now, and you can hear our report on that story in this video next.